totally different atmosphere at night. Hear him beeping all over now, huh? You're trying to save the rainwater there, huh?
Vaporwave, a genre that has been played out in every sense of the word. It's a genre of music that has produced both amazing and groundbreaking albums, as well as some terrible low-effort cash grabs that go past the level of laughably bad and straight into ear-grating. Although at this point, Vaporwave is also something that tends to transcend music itself, and over the years, it's become more well known for its aesthetic and iconography than its actual sound. Not everyone will know what Vaporwave really sounds like, but they sure as hell know what it looks like. And among these universally recognized aesthetics lies a key component to the whole thing, and that's nostalgia. But this key component is also its curse. Due to the nature of the genre itself, it's developed many subgenres and related musical scenes, with some of them focusing on conveying extremely specific emotions and imagery. Albums made to emulate the feeling of being in a mall, grocery store, watching the news in the 90s, or even working a shitty corporate job. This kind of music can be found all over the Vaporwave scene. In fact, it seems many people have made it their MO to seek out these albums and escape the confines of reality by immersing themselves in whatever strange, highly specific experience is being offered, filling the pitfalls and voids of their life in lieu of indulging in some hyper-escapism. And that, my friends, is what we're here to talk about. When musicality and evolutions in sound and experience are eschewed in favor of escapism. So let's hop on board the esoteric train and talk about Vaporwave and the curse of nostalgia. Also, massive shout out to Coppershore for the new intro. It's amazing. I love it. It seems a lot of you guys really like it, so check them out and give them a visit.
Break free and feel how splendid you are with the fragrance created by Gloria Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, a rich, expressive fragrance that reveals to the world just how splendid you are.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of everything, let's talk about Vaporwave and its origins, because I think context is key to understanding just how things got to be the way that they are. Vaporwave formed on the fringes of Bandcamp during the early 2010s, with now iconic records like Macintosh Plus's Floral Shop and Chuck Pearson's Echo Jams, all laying the foundation of what Vaporwave would ultimately become. The sound was based on a mixture of sampling, layered effects, and synths, creating a washy and warbled soundscape, often using samples from 80s and 90s music, as well as retro video games as their main components in each track. This was coupled with themes of hyper-consumerism, nihilism, and even a critique of late-stage capitalism, all wrapped up in an esoteric and alluring package. Many of the defining characteristics of Vaporwave also sprung from these records as well, with Echo Jams introducing a retro video game aesthetic, and more specifically water themes, with Echo the Dolphin being the mascot of the record. Floral Shop, on the other hand, would bring the oh-so-famous Greek statues and the saturated colors that we all know and love. And combined, this is where we really see the seeds of nostalgia initially take root, although they wouldn't fully encapsulate the genre yet, being a bit more tongue-in-cheek and satirical. And from here, we would see Vaporwave really grow into this massive scene and expand in just about every way. And this would lead to many spin-off genres, with Vapor Trap and Future Funk being two of the big ones. Albums like Blink Banshee Zero and Moe Shop's Pure Pure would continue to expand the genre into its own little scene with a variety of sub and spin-off genres, creating their own subcultures inside of the online electronic scene. However, whereas with these artists, we see how Vaporwave began to evolve into an entirely new scene of electronic genres, bringing new and innovative sounds and aesthetics to the world, on the other side of the coin, we can see this hyperfixation on nostalgia and the past begin to devolve into something much less ambitious in nature than what the genre started as. And this is where Mallsoft and its own tree of genres enters the conversation.
Beautiful drink, tap cola for beautiful people. Tap cola, you're beautiful to me. Real cola tastes just 1 calorie.
While it's debatable that Mallsoft was created with the intent of becoming a haven of hyper-escapism, it paved the road to it either way. The entire idea of Mallsoft is to create loungy and easy to listen to music drenched in reverb that almost replicates the sound of overhead speakers heard inside of a mall. Oftentimes, artists will include ambient samples of walking and talking to amplify the crowded mall atmosphere. And while that might sound like a fun and novel concept for an album or two, it's spiraled into a large part of what makes up the Vaporwave scene. And to anyone who's a stranger or new to this sort of thing, you might think that this is a genre that most people would casually listen to out of curiosity, but that's not the case. In fact, even legends of the Vaporwave scene like Pat Chennington and Dennis Mikula of Geometric Lullaby have found themselves ensnared in this genre. Dennis even talked about how he would go to crowded malls and walk around with his headphones on, listening to Mallsoft albums to really get the full experience.
I used to go to the Mall of America all the time. Okay. I just like have my headphones in. I would go by myself and just walk around. I don't know. It's like a feeling of like being alone, like by yourself, but with so many different people around you.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a name for that. There might be, but it's like a specific feeling. But yeah.
But for someone like Dennis, who lived in a rural and empty town most of his life, wanting to experience this type of atmosphere is a bit more understandable, as it would be a look into a side of things that he probably didn't experience much. But if you look at comments, reviews, and other creators from deeply populated areas like California and New York, they often express similar sentiments on how much they love to listen to these records and escape into the world of Mallsoft. Now, before we go any further, let me give you just a little sample of what you might hear when delving into the trenches of the genre. Not quite the most engaging thing, huh? But for some reason, this has entranced hundreds of thousands of eager listeners. And by this point, you might be seeing where I'm going with this, or you may be sitting there thinking, Madison, people like a weird genre of music. What's so wrong with that? And you're right. There isn't anything wrong with just enjoying Mallsoft. And my goal here isn't to just take a shit in the genre and those who like it either. I'm more so here to exemplify a point. And to be fair, I haven't shown you just how deep the rabbit hole goes, so bear with me, because from here, it only gets even more esoteric.
The checker plays a key role in this daily struggle. Methods of handling groceries and customers may vary from store to store, but the basic objectives are the same.
What if I told you there was a large group of people who yearned for a simulation of the ambience of an old grocery store? You'd probably laugh. But I'm not kidding when I say not only does such a record exist, but it's widely considered a classic of Mallsoft. The album we're talking about here is Yes, We Are Open, and it's exactly what you think it is. Take the sound of Mallsoft, but instead of reverb simulating overhead speakers in a crowded mall, it's now reverb simulating crappy ceiling speakers you would hear in a dumpy old grocery store. The sound of Yes We Are Open is much more loungy and subtle, playing on the repetitious nature of what you would actually hear in an old grocery store. And as you heard from the sample, it's just as boring as it sounds. But that doesn't mean I don't understand the appeal. If this at all piques your curiosity, it really is worth listening to at least once. And so does Mallsoft in general. But outside of the curiosity here, these hyper-specific and admittedly gimmick-based productions are worth only that. Yet many find themselves mystified and entranced by records like this. And again, before you think I'm just being an asshole here, let me give you another taste so you might be able to understand just where I'm coming from. As a simulation of a grocery store, it actually does quite a good job in capturing its ambience. And I commend the artist for capturing such a specific atmosphere that most would never really think to recreate, but outside of that, I can't exactly say much else. The gimmick gets a bit stale by the fourth track, not because the artist behind the music is bad, but because the idea and framework that the album is trying to fit doesn't really allow for much variety or experimentation. And to be honest, if the record wasn't at least a little boring, would it really fit the mood of mindlessly shopping at your local Kroger's? As I mentioned previously, it's hard to find much of an appeal to this genre outside of curiosity unless you weren't actually here for the music itself and were instead using this for a surrogate to either fill a void or experience a strange, hyper-specific ambience. But this is still just the tip of the iceberg. If you thought the esoteric train ride was over once we hit Vaughn's, we still have a few more stops on our way.
Good morning.
Good
How
morning.
are you? Thanks for joining us on the Monday morning show. And most of you sitting through the city with an inch and a quarter of rain.
Inch and a quarter?
Inch and a quarter. That was the rainfall total for the park. Walk over to the wall. We'll show you what it looks like. This shot showing you lower Manhattan. And everything is actually in pretty good shape now as we work into clear. But for us, bright sunny skies.
Alright, why are we talking about September 11th? What could Mallsoft possibly have to do with George Bush and his Middle Eastern oil campaign? Well, the simple answer is that some madman decided that Mallsoft just wasn't odd and esoteric enough, and felt a news-themed album set during the events of the date was the best choice to spice things up. Not only does this record exist, but just like Yes We Are Open, it's considered a classic. The album in question here is News at 11, written by Cat System Corp., another beloved figure in the scene who has actually produced some pretty great stuff during his tenure, though this album isn't one of those. The entire record is made up of loungy, smooth jazz songs strung between samples of news clips that aired on 9/11. As edgy as that might sound, the record doesn't actually contain any samples referencing the attack and is actually supposed to simulate what the day would have been like if the World Trade Center never got the 1-2 punch.
Buzz! We missed the truck! We're not aiming for the truck!
This only further shows the reaches that Mallsoft will go to create atmospheres of escapism, even if the music itself is just boring recycled songs reminiscent of what you would hear on CNN or Fox during the 90s. And all jokes aside, this is one of the few albums that actually kind of pissed me off. While I'm not against the idea of making jokes at the expense of heavy topics, hell, I just made multiple 9/11 jokes myself. What I am against is taking something as touchy and heavy as the topic at hand and slapping it onto a lazy collection of reused songs in an attempt to create interest for a bland and boring music project. If you want to use tragedy for laughs or even try to say something, I think that's great. And I would even go as far as to say that it's important to touch on the taboo from time to time. But that doesn't mean I won't find it tasteless when it's used in a shameless attempt to gain notoriety and clicks. Rant aside though, I don't hate Can System Corp. And he's gone on to put some interesting music out in the years since News at 11. But regardless, this album is just another boring hyper-escapist fantasy that continued to pave the esoteric road Mallsoft was going down. And yes, this rabbit hole goes even deeper.
I'm Stephen Wynn, and I run this magical place, the Golden Nugget Hotel in downtown Las Vegas. You know, all hotels have lobbies, but at the Nugget, we have a lobby. All hotels give you a room, but at the Nugget, you get a room. And of course, all hotels have restaurants, but at the Golden Nugget, have we got a restaurant? There's no hotel in the world like the Golden Nugget. We're going to make Las Vegas famous.
Something I've hinted at with News at 11 is that many of these albums have pseudo-stories attached to them. Now, to be fair, this is a common thread across nearly all Vaporwave adjacent genres, but it's really a necessity in Mallsoft, and this album, Atrium, is no exception. Its sheer size astounds you, a ceiling that seems to reach for miles without end. Glass elevators zoom up and down, silently passing each other. The light pouring through the ceiling inspires you. The music echoing through all 47 floors, sounds of wonder and new discoveries, yet the concrete walls make you feel cold and small. You can't help but get the feeling that you're totally alone. This is brutalism, and this is the hotel of the modern age. You know, I can't keep doing this section without a deviant art symbol in the background because holy fuck, that is tryhard. This is the accompanying description of Hallmark 87's legendary album, Atrium. And yes, I said legendary. This album has become a bit of an anomaly over the years, breaking out of the Mallsoft scene and becoming recognized by a more mainstream audience. So, besides the alluring description and some admittedly amazing artwork, what does Atrium do that makes it break the mold? Well, it doesn't rely as much on sampling and instead creates mostly original compositions, with an emphasis on a dreamlike quality and songs that feel as if they would belong more comfortably in the ambient genre. But imagine that being absolutely fucking destroyed by production elements that wash away any weight and texture the music once had. All to simulate the tinny cheap sound of a hotel elevator speaker. Outside of News at 11, I've actually tried to be relatively fair to Mallsoft. It's not my cup of tea and I'm not going to pretend that it is, but I'm also not going to unfairly just rip the genre to shreds just because it doesn't appeal to me. But in the case of Atrium, and a lot of other records, there's actually some good music, and in the case of Atrium itself and Hallmark 87's entire discography, there's some fantastic ambient tracks to be found. but I could never in good faith recommend this to anyone because the Mallsoft appeal of it has to come from absolutely ruining and destroying the tracks with terrible EQing to make it sound as tinny and thin as possible, and so much reverb that it washes out any of the actual texture that was there before. If you're familiar with music production, or you're an audiophile, or just anyone that is accustomed to listening to a lot of music, it's easy to tell what is there even if you can't audibly hear it. And that's the problem. In order to fit this hyper-escapist fantasy, they ruined what would otherwise have been a really great ambient record just to fit the Mallsoft aesthetic and feed into more of the mundane. But that's the thing, almost all the music I've referenced as being part of Mallsoft does the same thing, just to varying degrees. It all sacrifices musicality to become ambience, and Atrium is no different. Which brings me to what I've been building up to this entire video.
This is a mouthwatering megabyte chunk of bubble yum bubblegum.
And this is a virtual reality cyberspace simulator.
Both really get you into the game. For virtually unreal fun,
Soar with the yum.
bubble yum keeps it popping.
I'm sure you've noticed by now that I've been repeating the words escapism, hyper-specific, and ambience much more than any one person should ever do in a single conversation. And that's because that's the entire point. The title isn't just clickbait. Hyper-escapism is the curse of nostalgia. Something I hope to have conveyed is that Mallsoft really isn't meant to be music. And I'm not saying this as some angry nerd who wants to shit on something I don't like. But in the case of Mallsoft, it's unapologetically non-musical and has its focuses on creating hyper-specific ambience to synthesize the feelings of whatever album you're listening to is themed on. This is the entire point of why I brought up that interview with Pad Chennington. Within it, both Pad and Dennis talk about the respective Mallsoft genres that they listen to, with Dennis liking more traditional sounding stuff, and Pad describing that he likes this weird corporate side of things that he listens to while he works his graphic design job. And I'm not trying to just attack these two for their preferences or really anyone else. This video wasn't made to demonize anyone who enjoys this particular genre, but rather I made it because I wanted to bring up something that I found a bit interesting, albeit a bit startling. And that's something all of Vaporwave in a way perpetuates. Many people who discover this music as teenagers have aged, and as the world has continued to spiral deeper into clown world, becoming a harder place to simply exist in, more and more people have found themselves victims of their own vices. For some, it's alcohol. For others, it's food addiction. And for many, it's escapism. Whether that be through video games, collecting overpriced pieces of plastic, or yes, even listening to Mallsoft. So many people have found it easier to hide away in their own hyper-specific fantasy of abandoned malls, grocery stores, and haunted hotels, rather than deal with the reality that lies in front of them. Who needs friends and close relationships when you can escape into an alternate reality? Why not just put up with that underpaying job that makes you die inside when you hear the humming sounds of the grocery store?
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently.
Escapism is a massive issue, and while I could have made an entire video delving into it, I was more interested in just how much something as innocent and unassuming as Vaporwave, and especially Mallsoft, caters specifically to it. I have yet to see anyone else really bring this up, and I think it's something to take note of, because it's much easier to see you have a problem when you lose money to pieces of plastic or see your health diminish due to substance abuse. But when your vice is an ambience that's just a little awkward to tell your friends you listen to, it's all the easier to justify. In the end, enjoy what you want to enjoy, but do so in moderation, and don't fall victim to the escapist vice. But with that being said, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, support me on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video.